So I'm delighted to welcome everybody to the second of our webinars from our Living Well with Cancer webinar series. With our service moving online and the conferences cancelled, it really made sense to develop a webinar series for health practitioners, for patients, carers, and the interested public. This series is brought to you from the Living Room, which is the home of supportive care at Chris O'Brien Lifehouse Comprehensive Cancer Centre in Sydney, Australia. At Lifehouse, we aim to provide cancer treatment in a way that supports, nurtures, and empowers patients, their families, and carers through mutually beneficial partnerships. And we hope that this series complements other webinars and talks and podcasts in the field that assist in informing people how best to live with cancer. The opinions that are expressed on this webinar series don't necessarily represent those of Chris O'Brien Lifehouse and are not in place of medical or healthcare professional advice. But having said that, I'm going to introduce two people who probably do very much represent Chris O'Brien Lifehouse and the views of Chris O'Brien Lifehouse. I'm really delighted to be introducing Gail O'Brien AO and Rev Christine Garforth in conversation as they explore the intangibles of Chris O'Brien at Chris O'Brien Lifehouse from its inception through to today. So the main topic of this discussion today is really a conversation, and it's a conversation between Gail and Christine, who will explore these intangibles at Lifehouse. They'll consider the questions of how do we live our values and create and embed a culture of kindness, caring and compassion. How does this ethos translate to the lived experience of our staff and our patients and their loved ones? And they'll probably touch on many other points, and you'll have a time at the end of our discussion. We're going to leave about 15 minutes for question and answer. So a bit of housekeeping, and then I'll introduce Gail and Christine more formally. Down the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A little button. Please use that rather than the chat button, and just write your questions as you're going through that you'd like to ask. At about the 15-minute mark, I'll come back on, my voice at least will come back on, and I'll feed some of these questions to Gail and Christine, and hopefully we'll get through most of those during the period that we have. So let me introduce Gail and Christine. So Gail O'Brien AO is the patient advocate and board director at Chris O'Brien Lifehouse, which is a world-class integrated and comprehensive cancer care hospital, which is in her bio again. We know that. Chris O'Brien Lifehouse is the legacy of her late husband, Professor Chris O'Brien AO, who was integral in realising his dream. Gail has had a long career as a health professional, as a physiotherapist in health administration and development. Professor Chris O'Brien was an exceptional and celebrated cancer surgeon who died in 2009. After Chris's death and the tragedy that followed 2 years later with the sudden death of her eldest son, Gail found the strength to carry on, and in harnessing the lessons learned from her life experience has worked tirelessly to enhance the care given to patients and their families at Chris O'Brien Lifehouse. Gail's AO was awarded for distinguished service to the community health as an advocate for and supporter of cancer sufferers and their families through comprehensive research and treatment programs. The AO recognises Gail's service and dedication to those whose lives are touched by cancer, and is a testament to her incredible generosity and fortitude. But more than that, Gail is just an absolutely wonderful person who embodies everything that that cancer care, cancer advocacy and Lifehouse is. And being in her presence inspires all those around her. That wasn't in your bio, Gail. Reverend Christine Garforth is the spiritual care coordinator at Chris O'Brien Lifehouse. She's an ordained interfaith minister with a passion for supporting others and honouring our shared human need to be seen and accepted without judgment. Christine was the co-founding member of the Sydney Sacred Centre which offers monthly services embracing the wisdom and beauty of the world's varied spiritual traditions. Her ministry acknowledges the importance of each individual's faith journey and also includes creating and offering non-denominational ceremonies such as weddings, blessings, and memorial services. More than that, Christine has a very strong presence on our ward and for patients and their families who are being treated here at Lifehouse. And she brings comfort to many people within this hospital and to many of the staff. And this is a very complex and very incredibly humbling job, really, working with people living and with cancer at all stages. And so it's an honour to welcome Christine and Gail in conversation. I'm going to, at this stage, just hopefully disappear and be in the background and hand over to Gail and Christine.
Thank you, Judith, and welcome everyone. So before we begin our conversation, I guess just to give you a tiny bit of background about our process. As we were invited to talk today, it was important to Gail and I to, I guess, understand what it was we wanted to share. And this is a subject that's very close to both our hearts. So it's been a beautiful time in preparing. And we've got some, I guess, items that we know are important that we share, and the rest will unfold as it will. And as you may see and be curious about, we're actually in my office at the moment, which is located in one of the wards at the hospital. So you might see some activity behind us, but we also felt it was appropriate to be on the ward, which is where the primary focus of our care is. So we'll begin, I guess, at the beginning with the idea or the inspiration for Lifehouse, Chris O'Brien Lifehouse, and some of the significant moments leading up to the creation of this beautiful hospital. So if you would like to share, that's the beginning of that story.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Judith. I think we were going to start with the word inspiration, weren't we?
We were. So inspiration really meaning in spirit, in flow, and things sometimes beyond our understanding.
Yes. So if we think of the origin story is so important to the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse and how we actually came to be. In our discussions with Christine, I said there was always a sense of providence for me, even when Chris was, became the star of the first reality TV show, RPA. For me, there was a sense of providence because he ended up having this fan club, and all the family thought it was very funny. But then he became the director. He was a surgeon, but he became director of the Sydney Cancer Centre. He had a huge workload in terms of being in charge of cancer services, Sydney Southwest Area Health Service. And at that time, he had this inspiration, this sense of spirit to create a centre of excellence for cancer patients in Sydney for the people of New South Wales, and as it turns out, for Australia and the wider world, really. So the origin story is so incredibly important, and because we're fundamentally spiritual beings, so that's how we got started. He then he himself was diagnosed with a glioblastoma multiforme in 2006. And at that stage, he'd been the Sydney Cancer Centre director for 3 years. And that experience for us, from health professional to patient and a carer, is what really taught us. It seemed to be a spiritual path that we were on. And even though we didn't verbalize it that way, we knew it. There was a knowing about it. And that knowing actually was what went into the vision of this place. And I often present a slide when I'm doing the orientations, and just to show how it transferred. Doesn't come up terribly well there, but how Chris's vision for this place became different after his own health experience. Originally it was a place of science, men and women of science, and after his diagnosis it became about holistic and healing. And although he was a very compassionate doctor, that's what everybody loved about him on the RPA show, he was always committed to medical excellence and clinical excellence and research, but the emphasis became on compassion and empathy, these things that are sort of intangible, but they're things that you feel. And so that the spiritual body became so important. It's the spiritual body that feels the compassion and the empathy. And we actually had this experiential knowledge that it was important to treat the whole person in a holistic manner, and it was not just about the disease.
Mm. And you talked about another moment where you were at the Great Hall at the University of Sydney.
Yes, so I was sort of catapulted after Chris's death into an arena of public speaking and politics and bureaucracy. So I sort of fell off the ledge. But there was always this sense of providence. So at the Great Hall I made a really powerful speech, which surprised me too. It was like, who am I channeling here? And then there was a sense that this was all for a higher purpose.
Mm-hmm. And then we got to another significant moment about the groundbreaking and being in that moment, knowing that it was actually going to come to life, and thinking about all that had been up until that point.
Yes. So we broke the ground with the Prime Minister and some other politicians. With this organisation, there's been a bit of a revolving door of politicians, actually.
Mm.
But the breaking of the ground was significant because after Chris's death, there had been quite a bit of disruption, moving from one sort of more corporate branding ideal to a more subtle one, which was to encompass the holistic approach. So that changed the colours. I learned a lot about branding from corporate colours to a more holistic feel. And I know that sometimes people think the green and yellow are a bit much, but that it is about nature and healing and that small, subtle approach.
Yeah. And you were talking about how at that point remembering the decision about the experience of cancer and what that can be like.
That's right, yes, because we were talking about the fact that cancer can be such an arduous, fearful process. So, and this is what Chris and I felt. And I think I told you the story about how we were at traffic lights 1 year after his diagnosis. And it had been the worst year you could possibly imagine. And I just said to him, not looking at him straight ahead, that this has been such a terrible year, but in many ways I wouldn't be without it. And he was silent for 30 seconds or so, and he said, neither would I.
Yeah, there is something to that, the beauty in those moments that are hard to imagine.
And where does that come from?
Right. And so, and then we talk about the blessing of the ground.
Well, this is something that is a big-part secret that I'm exposing today. Although at the time the administration did know that I was doing that, which was to bless the ground. And I came here, it was actually the 30th of November. I actually did come with a priest and a close friend who felt the same way. And it was about purifying the land, acknowledging what has happened here, and adding some spiritual gravitas to the land. So I'm really glad that we did that. I remember that all the time. It was incredible because it was a big hole in the ground. There were only construction workers, multiplex workers here, and they let us on these planks of wood, hard hats and high-vis jackets, and we stood with the construction workers with each reading a prayer. In fact, the priest gave one of the construction workers a prayer, and would you believe his name was Adam, and my son Adam had only died 6 months before. And Adam, who was reading a prayer, was a big burly construction guy, but with his hands stumbled over the words a bit. But I tell you, that moment with us standing in this hole in the ground with just the construction workers, it was just so memorable. It's a beautiful moment.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. And perhaps you can share a little bit about some of the consideration that went into the look and feel of Lifehouse. So we do hear a lot here about how it feels, how the building feels, what it feels like to be here. And yeah, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about the choices that you made around the branding or the decisions at the hospital.
Yeah. So it was the vision statement, which was I had the opportunity to present in October of 2009, so well after Chris's death, which encompassed also our experiences. And I had a deep sense that this needed to be translated into what we had. It's all right speaking about the Great Hall, that this is going to be something different, but how is it different? It's not just about building a building. So the vision statement caused a lot of disruption in changing the branding and also the vision statement influenced the architecture.
Right.
And so what a privilege that and it was to work with architects, as did many of the people who are involved now. But from the vision statement point of view, it was to be a building that was full of light, because we know that light is the highest form of energy, and that it needed to have a protected feel, that it needed to feel humane, it needed to make people feel warm and nurtured, and in fact all the things that are in our values now are the things that this hospital had to convey, and certainly with the natural materials and the light, and that's what the architecture had to.
Beautiful. And the logo?
The logo is the Star of Hope. It's all these little houses coming together. I remember Chris working with all these little houses on the desk saying, what do you think of the name Lifehouse? And I'm like, yeah, sounds good to me. So yeah, the logo is the Star of Hope, which shines through these little houses, and that's what our key need is here, that sense of hope, the sense of creating possibilities for ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so on the feedback on the building, I thought we often actually share feedback with one another about what patients tell us. And sometimes to, I guess, make this real, it's nice to share some of that. So I know we often hear how beautiful the building is, and patients will say there's nowhere like it, that they really feel the difference when they're here, feel something special that's hard to describe. But I have a patient who I know quite well that has come for daily treatment for some time, and she will arrive 2 to 3 hours before her treatment starts to sit in the foyer, in particular in front of the banner that has Chris's image on it with his words about hope. And because she tells me that it is one of the few places she can come that is pure love, and that's how it feels for her. And she really just needs that warmth and that care prior to her treatment. So it's very tangible for her.
That's beautiful, and it also recognizes the fact that cancer is not just a science journey, it's a soul journey.
Yeah.
I have a patient also whom I'm sure you know, who as soon he's very high, he's a professional man, so you wouldn't think that he's into anything terribly spiritual necessarily. He's very much about tangible things, and but he said, I just feel this sense of serenity and protection and sort of numinous feel when I come in here. So what is that?
Yeah.
And we're supposed to be able to define it.
Good question. If you could let us know. Yeah. So I guess it's on that, the translation of. So there's all these inspired ideas, these incorporating values and the mission statement and things like that into this space. But how does it translate to the field that we have here today? And perhaps you can, share a little bit about what your experience has been like in bringing this all to life.
It's been a struggle, to be honest, that with so many people, and we have that, because I like to just, we talked about a metaphor. Somehow I was inspired to use this metaphor of the hearth of the home. So Chris is, as I see, the hearth of this home. For the younger people who don't know what a hearth is, it's a fireplace, a fireplace, and going back, thousands of years, fireplaces, so the hearth has been there for nutrition, for cooking, and for warmth. A place for people to congregate around and be in communion and so forth. So I feel like Chris is that. He's the hearth of this home, bringing warmth and nourishment to the place. And but you have to you have to have the right people. You have to have the right leadership, obviously, to make sure that the hearth is stoked all the time, that it's always burning. And so we have amazing energy in here, incredible leadership, and everybody who works here. But I was asked to come here as the patient advocate, basically, I think, to keep stoking, we'll stand by the fire and let people know, in particular, for example, our CEO, Eileen, when I see the flames needing a bit of fuel. And she is an amazing leader who will then immediately, okay, you get down there, you stoke that fire, you get down there, you do that. And so that's how I see it, that we are all working, we're all bringing our the fuel to this fire, this heart, our inspiration and our innovation and our energy and our love. But I'm just standing there watching it. I'm the keeper of the flame.
Yes, and or if you wouldn't mind sharing that other beautiful story that you had with the person that you had a meeting one time where you were speaking and someone asked you a question.
So again, having fallen off this ledge into public speaking and so forth, I was at an event where there are it was an unusual event in nearby in Marrickville. Lots of dancing and so forth, and then a young woman said to me, so it was obviously a fundraising event, and she said, what do you do there at the Chris O'Brien Lifehouse? So I don't know why I said that, but I just said, oh, I'm the keeper of the ethos. And she thought for a minute, and then she said, how does someone become that, the keeper of the ethos?
And now we know.
Well, now we know.
The keeper of the ethos.
Yeah.
Well done. And you do it well.
Thank you very much.
So our values. We've talked a little, we've referred to them a little bit. There are 5, they're on our website, and we won't read them all out right now, but there are a few key, I think, phrases. One is nurture, cultivating compassionate support. Another is respect, embracing diversity, and putting people at the center of our business. And 3 is discovery, as we advance and inspire hope. And I think all of those speak really beautifully to the feeling that is here. And I have a few quotes, and I think you probably have some stories, but as we talk about how those are translated here, and you used the word soul before, and I found this yesterday. Sometimes I write down things following conversations with people because they stand out to me and are extraordinary. And this is from a patient who I had spent a little bit of time with, and she had been here for months, and she was being discharged, and I was sitting with her outside waiting for her friend to come and pick her up, and she said to me, "The nurse is here. In fact, all the care, it's just exceptional. It's like one big soul, loving and caring." And that's actually how it feels. And another patient shared with me this. It was actually at a time she had just had some radiation treatment. She was in a waiting room, and a few other patients that were familiar with one another gathered around. We were having a conversation. And it's beautiful to witness because I actually wasn't in the conversation as such. I was observing. And they were talking between them about the amazing care that they received here, how much love they feel here. And this beautiful patient said, "The care and compassion allows you to surrender and trust." And it landed so deeply with me, that statement. And I actually went to see her after to confirm that those were actually her words, because I thought that's incredible that the feeling of care and the feeling of compassion can have that big of an impact on our ability to receive the treatment and surrender to whatever it is that's happening, whether be it treatment or diagnosis or whatever place you are in the journey, but to, the importance of that feeling of care and compassion. Beautiful. Yeah.
There is a chain of events before you came to us. So I want to ask you about how you approach your role, but I do remember there was preceding the spiritual care role being so important. It was always important to me, but we had to get to it. So it was all in the cosmic timing.
Yeah.
So preceding you, we had the integrative medicine space, which was always important to have a holistic approach to care, body, mind, the emotions, and the spiritual. But even though that addresses so many of the supportive things that are multidimensional in us, there still needed to be somebody who was a trained person in the spiritual care space. And Eileen, who's our CEO, actually at one point asked me to do it. And even though I had a strong sense of it and I had a sense of self-efficacy, I suppose, I knew I wasn't the right person to do it. Such a difficult role. And can you tell me more about how you approach it?
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to start with actually one of the first lines in the role, in the position description itself, which is that the spiritual care coordinator role is responsible for coordinating and providing spiritual care services to meet the needs of patients, their families, and staff. So that meet the needs piece, I think, is the most important. And prior to that, actually, what the role needs to be able to do is to identify the needs and understand what those spiritual needs might be. And I think that's probably the most important part. And then from there, what it looks like is incredibly varied, which is such one of the most beautiful parts of the role. Never are 2 days the same. And I think from an external point of view and what's visible, spiritual care can look sometimes like it's tied to religion. And it can be, depending on people's religious or spiritual beliefs, but not always. And I think there's an assumption that it is sort of founded in some religious principle. But the truth of spirituality is that it's quite individual and unique to each person, and needs to be respected for whatever it is for each person. And quite often has nothing to do with religion. So from a visible point of view, it can look like something to do with organizing communion for our patients, or organizing to help facilitate a baptism or a commitment ceremony, or even a wedding we've had in my time since I started, or facilitating a Buddhist priest to come and offer a blessing. It can look like for supporting our staff, holding debriefs, regular debriefs for our staff members, or what we call in-services or training sessions where we talk about things like self-care or even spiritual care. Organizing memorial service or remembrance services to honor the needs of people in their grief and in their remembering. I think we had a baptism. We had a baptism, we did. So it can look like an incredible, like a big rainbow, really. But beyond that, I guess the most important part of the role is listening. Mm-hmm. And being a presence. So being a loving, calming, grounding, supportive presence. And then when there is a safe space, and it's always my intention to create a safe place for people to be, then there's that potential for people to be able to explore, reflect, wonder, have a conversation, express, whatever it is that feels appropriate for them in that time. And we never know what's going to come. And as I try to prepare for today and put words to some of this, it's really difficult to explain. And I guess that's the way with intangibles. So often it's easiest with some kind of stories, which I won't ever share any of the particular conversations we have because they're all confidential, of course. But in preparing for today, what I did was spend some time reading through my journal. So I keep a journal as part of my self-care. And in there I write many things, sometimes quotes that I hear that I think I want to remember that, sometimes particular words or phrases or experiences. And I spend some time reading my journal lately. And so what I thought would be helpful to explain the role of spiritual care is to share a little bit about the types of conversations that I have, or that we have. And if you'll allow me, I'll do that now. So, and this, I guess, is just a taste. It's certainly not comprehensive, but it's a sample. Mm-hmm. So sometimes people going through these, difficult moments need to have conversations with their family members or loved ones, and aren't always sure about how to do that because we do, care so deeply for the loved ones in our lives that we worry about burdening them or how to make them feel. So sometimes we're unsure how to have those conversations, and often what needs to be expressed is what are the wishes of the person, especially if they're terminal or nearing the end of their life. Well, what is it that's most important to them right now? What are their hopes for this period of time, and what are their hopes for their family? And it's difficult to know how to begin those conversations or what to say in them. So we might explore that together. Had many beautiful conversations with family members. So as, again, we might have patients who are at their end of life, and they have their loved ones, their mother or a daughter or sister or friend, sitting with them, quite often for most of the day and night. And often people will, on the way to or from the room, come into my office and sit with me, sometimes in silence, sometimes to express feelings, sometimes to just express their feelings of helplessness. We can never really know what those conversations are hold, but they're precious. I've had some incredibly moving conversations with parents who are young parents who need to find a comfortable way of being at peace, of leaving their children behind. Some of them young children behind. Some of them children who may not remember them. And how to have those conversations, how to begin them, how to find a way of being comfortable knowing that they're leaving your child. I've had some beautiful conversations with people about their feelings going through treatment, their feelings of exhaustion or all sorts of emotions, but then generally following the touching on the difficult things come the conversations about hope and what brings us hope. Maybe what brings us purpose, a sense of purpose for this time in our treatment or in our life at that moment. I have some amazing conversations with people who reflect over their lifetime and find a sense of purpose, find a sense of meaning, enjoy talking about what has been most meaningful to them. So it might be parenting or, generally I find what people are most proud of is how they live their values and what those have been: kindness, respect, compassion, love, loving one another. But I've had the case where people, family members have put photo albums together of a lifetime and shared those with me too, or brought me into conversations where they've together reflected over a lifetime of meaning. And it's very moving to hear. And also, I guess the patients who we know, who we maybe develop deeper or longer relationships with because they've been here for extended periods of time, some of the months following surgery or treatment. And we get to know one another. We have those times where we can laugh together and times where we cry together. But those moments where they leave the ward, where they walk out, and we can witness them in that pride as they walk out, knowing that they're recovering, that they are hopeful of a new period in their life that perhaps they didn't know would come. So just grace-filled moments. And I am often asked by patients following some of these conversations about how it is that, or why, different questions about how I do this. And my answer generally really is it's just a privilege. It feels a privilege and an honor, and it is very humbling. You use that word, Judith, thank you. It is very humbling to bear witness to people's life.
Thank you, Christine and Gail, and I thank you so much for this conversation. I think it would be a really good opportunity now really just to check in with some of the questions that people are asking. I know, Gail, you've got some final words. We might kick them to the final part. Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely.
And absolutely. I think we can talk about this for a very long time. When we talk about whole person care and cancer care, we talk about caring for the mind, the body, the spirit of the person. And it's really defining what spirit is, which is often, I've worked in palliative care for many years. Defining spirit is very difficult. And so there are a few questions that have come up from some of the participants, and I encourage other participants to keep asking some questions, and they're flowing through now. The first one is from a woman called Juliet O'Brien.
You would.
Of course you would. Wonderful webinar, Christine and Mum. I have a question for Christine. How do you speak to patients and families who are atheists or agnostic? And do you think in some ways it's a bit harder for them to cope? And I think this really touches, it's a beautiful question because it really touches on differentiating spiritual and spirituality from religion and organised religion, belief in God, belief in a higher other. And so that would be a really, I'm very interested in your answer to this question. It's a question that's asked a lot, and I think it's really important for people from different religions, different beliefs, or as we know in Australia, a lot of people who are either agnostic or atheists.
Thank you. Good question, Juliet. I guess to say that because people may have religious beliefs also, it doesn't necessarily mean that at this time in their life that they're comforted by those, because I think when we're faced with our mortality or any existential question, it's the time where we can question everything and anything. And so even people who may have some strong faith or have had strong faith at these times can even question that faith. There are a lot of people who, what I call, have earth-based spirituality, which is really a belief in life cycle through nature. So, I've had a beautiful conversation with a professor of science who talked to me about matter and water and how all matter on Earth is recycled. All water in the universe, it's all recycled. We all come from dust, if you like, and return to dust. And so we have conversations often about earth-based beliefs. And I think there's a general agreement with most of the people that I have these conversations with that we really don't know. The mystery is just that none of us really knows. And so how to find comfort in a time of uncertainty is very challenging, and where to find hope. And that's often the very thing that we talk about. And so for each person, it's different and very personal. And those will be my questions to that person is, well, where do you find hope? And indeed, very personally, each person will share. And oftentimes it's in relationships. It's in finding a sense of purpose or meaning in how they live right now, or how they contribute, what values they live, and also what they hand down to others. And so not necessarily children, but how do I leave this earth, and what will people remember me by, and how I lived, is it aligned with my values? And we have those kind of dialogue.
And there's also then how would you define spirit? I think we've spoken about the spirit.
How long do we have? 30 seconds?
Just in one sentence.
Yeah. I to be honest, spirit to me is whatever way in which we find meaning. So if we look at something like cancer, if you like, or take COVID for, we can all say, well, why is it here? And why me? And why now? And however we answer that question, that is our spirituality, right? We can place it on something that's outside of ourselves, or we can place it on something that's within ourselves, or between us all, I guess, acknowledging whatever it is that feels real for us. So to me, that's spirituality, and spirit is the thing where we find our comfort and make meaning, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
And there was another question.
Can I answer?
Yes.
Yeah. I think in science now they call consciousness spirit, and certainly because of all the trauma in our family over a short period of time, I've had to do a lot of delving into what is the meaning of all of this. And my sense of consciousness being a bit like the Jungian, certainly like the Jungian idea of we are part of a collective consciousness. So that part of us that is spirit is connected with the higher consciousness. Yeah.
And I'm going to expand on this thread a little bit further. Another question that came out, and I'm going to embellish it a little bit, but talked about the various spiritual layers that exist within Lifehouse. So we've got art, we have music, we have all the touch therapies, the living room, mind-body therapies that form a significant part of the offerings that we have here, whether it's yoga, which can be seen as a spiritual practice, meditation, and mindfulness, which is for some people a way of connecting to their inner self, or their ability to be still in the presence of during difficult times. Do you see this as I see that as caring for the spirit. Can you, either of you, really comment on how you see that integrating into this holistic care of a person, their mind, their body, and their spirit, by providing all of these offerings, the music therapists in the corridor, the music when you move in, the touch therapies, the engagement with staff that connect at that level, and how do you think that enhances the healing for patients?
Yeah. So all of those things I would suggest can be spiritual practices, and they're things that can, as you say, connect us to that peace within ourselves. Spiritual practice really for every individual is different, but all of those 100% I would agree are part of holistic care of mind, body, and spirit. I've had some amazing experiences with all different therapies and hearing about the impact that they've had with patients and their care. I have one particular memory of a patient who was longing to be able to share something and leave something for his son that helped his son understand who he was. And he was estranged from his son and couldn't necessarily pass on something in detail. And so he didn't know what he was going to do. He spoke to me about it for many, many weeks. And as it happened, a music therapist came into his room one day, and they had a lot of time together over the weeks, the music therapist and the patient wrote a song, or the music therapist helped him to put his lyrics to music. They created a song. And I had the privilege on this patient's last day before he was discharged of hearing the song, which moved us all to tears. We all sat in the room in tears. And it was actually, which I don't even think was the intention, but anyway, it summed up this man's values in the most beautiful way. And I know the song found its way to his son.
It's lovely.
Yeah, and also that, and I know in my own family, I've seen how the creative arts have been so healing in my son and my daughter. Yeah. My son actually did a degree in music following his elder brother's death, and my daughter wrote a book, as some people know. So those creative arts have been incredibly healing, and then you see it. It's kind of a tangible way to see healing through these creative arts within here. And when you see the women on a Wednesday collect together, and they don't have to talk. They just do their handiwork, and there's that supportive community. You see the healing of the patients on the ward when they create the song that you're talking about, because you see it in their faces. There's a lightness, there's a joy in them when they are going through the most terrible experience.
And it can let them express things that they weren't even aware that they were holding. And I think it's the same with all the physical practices as well. Reflexology, yoga, any of the massage, any of those that we offer, it really allows people to heal physically, to clear emotions, sometimes to be in touch with their physical experience, to feel touch on their bodies can be really healing at a time where they can feel stressed. So.
And I think our reflexologists and massage therapists treating people in their rooms creates a spiritual space for them, for some patients. There's another question, because we have quite a few questions that are starting to come in, so I'm going to rush through a little bit because we only have another 6 minutes. Why do you think that this spiritual aspect is generally missing in most healthcare settings? And we're most definitely body and soul, but why not treat both? And that also, I'm going to connect that with another question. It's actually somebody from the United States who commented that this seems like such an amazing, compassionate place, one where I would want to be if I was going through cancer treatment, I live in the United States, I'm not sure if there's a place like this here. And it's that sense that, is this something that all healthcare services really should incorporate? And are there gaps elsewhere? Are there still gaps in what we're providing?
And
Maybe Gail can answer that.
I'm going to go back to the heart of the home here, because we've talked about this in preparation. Why do other hospitals not feel it? It's not us saying, it's patients saying that. And but I think it's and I can only do it with that metaphor that we have created within, by right of who he was and what he went through. Chris was the inspiration. Chris O'Brien was the inspiration. It then grew. It's like the butterfly effect. One small, well, it wasn't so small. It was a pretty big thing that happened. Yeah. But it was the idea to do this, and that idea has attracted and attracted and attracted the right people, and it is having an effect like a butterfly effect.
Yeah, and I also think it's in answering that question, it's something about the we don't know what we don't have when we don't have it. And so until we can, right, so until we can experience it, until we have the experience of what it's like with it, then we go, oh, we're missing that. But when what you know is what you know and you don't have it, then it just seems the status quo.
Absolutely. And it's not just about putting a badge on someone and saying, I'm in charge of patient experience.
Right. There's very much a lived experience here.
Yeah. And I think that is, I'm working in the field of integrative oncology. It was a field that didn't really exist and doesn't really exist a lot in Australia. And as you get the sense of what else can you offer patients that is going to enhance their wellness, their journey, their living with cancer, you realise there is so much more, and you can go so much further when you connect and offer treatments that also nurture the spirit as well as the physical. Absolutely. There's a lovely comment from a patient with a question tacked on. So, hi, what lovely people you are. I'm a patient at your hospital. Also caring for my mother who's entering palliative care elsewhere. My mother and I are agnostic, so in response to Juliet's question, I feel that we would feel very safe and supported by both Christine and Gail. As a scientist, I value the psychology knowledge of this end of life time, reflection on time and the value of human connection. Is there a support service you can recommend to support people once they're not able to access your services at Lifehouse? And I think this is, I'm going to start with a bit of an answer to that. And I guess that we work very closely with palliative care services for people with advanced cancer. And the idea is that ideally that people should be referred early, that it should be a proactive approach to caring for the whole person, their mind, their body, their spirit. That is the definition of palliative care and supportive care. And I think the idea that ideally that we can hand over knowledge of a patient to the service that's going to pick up and care for them is really something that we need to continue to work on and develop that clear communication and that continuity of care. But I'll ask you, who are really in the forefront of that space, how do you assist in that continuity of care when you've worked with the family and got them to this point? How do you ensure that that care is continued in the community?
So it depends, I guess, on each case, but in some cases where we've have a relationship that's come about in either the person being an inpatient or an outpatient, we will often continue that relationship even when they're not receiving treatment here. I also find that it's important to check in with families, the bereaved families. So there are families who, our relationship is not just with the patient, it's with the family. So we also stay in touch with families post that treatment and death at times. So there is some continuity with myself, and I think with Gail as well. obviously that's, it sort of comes about organically. We don't have a structure in place where we make sure we're in touch with every single person. I don't know, it tends to be however it unfolds. But we also, I think, through talking and supporting people in this way, comes a dialogue around the importance of seeking support, of understanding our needs, of listening to our bodies and knowing how we're coping. Do we need support? And that giving ourselves permission to seek support outside of this environment and within the community as well. So empowering people to think about what their needs are and to, and
empowerment and self-efficacy are, I think, two really important components of what we can't, a lot of our work in this whole supportive care space, whether it's psycho-oncology, spiritual care, integrative therapies, palliative care, is really to enable self-efficacy and self-empowerment, to enable people to understand what they need and to assist them and provide resources to assist them to continue to support that growth and finding meaning at this time of life. And I think the bereavement services also for family is often a lovely opportunity to continue those conversations in that you may have been able to bring people to a certain point, but it's a time, maybe weeks to months, even years later, that people can actually process that and move forward in their lives. So that's that would be my take on that question.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Now we're actually at the end of our hour. And fortunately, at the end of the question, there is one question which I will answer privately afterwards. But I'd like to thank you very much for all your time. But Gail, do you have some words that you'd like to finish with?
I'm wondering if it might be a bit too long, Judith. It was just a passage from Chris's book. This is the first edition. It was a commemorative one.
I think it's good to close with his words. I think
it would be really lovely.
We do.
So, of course, he reflected a lot on life. And he particularly reflected on that word grace. And he wrestled with the inner journey, basically, which is what all of our patients are going through. But ultimately, he just decided he was just going to trust. And he wrote this on page, sorry, I didn't bring my glasses.
You want mine?
But I think, I'm not quite sure. Oh yeah, they're good, thank you.
Collaborative.
So he says, so reflecting on life, this and other unexpected reunions have led me to the belief that life is not a linear experience, but rather a circular process, as if it all began when countless pebbles were cast upon a vast pool, each creating its own expanding circle of existence. A million circles intersect, sometimes creating little eddies of turbulence or occasionally coalescing with others to form larger circles which are strengthened and enriched in their course by their partners, and then often looping back to close an old unfinished circle or to re-establish an old contact. Or perhaps the growth and progression of the life force is multidimensional, like a sphere, a balloon, or indeed like the expanding universe itself. A linear existence would leave behind too much and accommodate too narrow a path of experience, even if it was happily circuitous and meandering. If it is this way, our lives can touch and affect many individuals whom we may never even meet, and continue to be influential long after consciousness, respiration, and the pumping of blood have ceased.
That's beautiful, Gail. And I think that's a lovely point to say. Thank you very much for that closing message. And thank you very much, Christine and Gail, for your time, your thoughtful comments, your thoughtful reflections. I think it's really important to acknowledge how important this space is that we work in, and how much we can learn from each other, and we can also learn from our patients and their families and our colleagues. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for contributing to our webinar series on living well with cancer. And we will update you on the next webinar that will be coming soon. And this webinar, for those people who missed it or couldn't stay for the whole piece, has been taped, and the recording will come out within a week or so. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for a very reflective and interesting discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.